She flew to Seoul to save her dying relationship. Instead, she was kidnapped by a ruthless Korean billionaire obsessed with her for 20 years. Zara wakes in Kang Tae-jun's glass penthouse with one rule: 60 days to fall in love with her captor or walk away forever, rich and free. No chains, no force, just raw, magnetic obsession from the man who built an empire on a dying vision of her face. Will she fight him? Or finally surrender to the only man who truly sees her? The air in the VIP lounge of Incheon International didn't just feel expensive. It felt sterile, like a vacuum designed to suck the life out of anything human. Zara watched the condensation drip down her glass of untouched scotch, her reflection ghosting against the dark liquid. Beside her, Ethan was buried in his phone, his thumb flicking through spreadsheets with a rhythmic, dismissive aggression. He hadn't looked at her since they crossed the Pacific. He hadn't looked at her since their anniversary dinner 3 months ago, when he'd forgotten the date entirely. This trip to Seoul was supposed to be a reconnection, a grand gesture wrapped in a business trip. But as the neon pulse of the city hummed in the distance, Zara realized she wasn't a partner. She was luggage. Polished, branded, and entirely overlooked. She didn't know that across the terminal, behind the reinforced glass of a blacked-out sedan, a man was breathing in her existence like a lungful of oxygen after 20 years underwater. Kang Tae-jun didn't move. He didn't blink. His hand, scarred across the knuckles, rested motionless on the leather armrest. For 2 decades, a single image had burned behind his eyelids every time he closed them. A flash of amber eyes and a specific curve of a jawline seen through the haze of his own blood and his father's dying screams. He had built an empire on shadows and bone just to find the girl from the vision. And there she was, real, bleeding, neglected. The hunt was over. The possession was beginning. He didn't want her body yet. He wanted the vacancy in her soul that the man beside her was too stupid to fill. 2 months. That was the timeline. In 60 days, he would either own her heart or he would let the world burn. A ghost doesn't just haunt a house. It waits for the living to walk into the trap. Today, the ghost of a dying boy's vision finally takes a breath of real air. And the woman with amber eyes has no idea her life ended the moment she stepped off the plane. The silence between Zara and Ethan was a living thing, thick and suffocating as the elevator rose toward the penthouse of the Sheila. "Did you respond to the LVMH brief?" Ethan asked, his eyes never leaving the digital glow of his screen. "I'm on vacation, Ethan," Zara said. Her voice was sandpaper. "We're in Seoul for the strategy launch. It's a working holiday. Don't be emotional." Don't be emotional. The phrase was a needle under her fingernails. Zara turned her head, staring at the blurred lights of the city. She was 32, at the top of her game in luxury branding, and she felt like a ghost. She was a striking accessory to Ethan's polished career. He liked the way she looked on his arm at galas, but he hated the way she thought. The doors chimed. They stepped out into the suite, but Zara didn't stop. She walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, the city was a vein of neon gold. "I'm going for a walk," she said. "It's midnight, Zara. Stay in. We have the Samsung meeting at 8. I need air that hasn't been recycled through a vent." She didn't wait for his permission. She grabbed her trench coat and left. The streets of Myeongdong were thinning out, the humidity of the night clinging to her skin. Zara walked with her shoulders back, a habit of a woman who had spent her life being told she took up too much space. She liked the anonymity of the crowd. She liked that here she was just a silhouette. She stopped at a small bridge overlooking a darkened canal. She leaned against the cold stone, closing her eyes. "You shouldn't be out alone." The voice wasn't loud. It was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the ground beneath her feet. Zara's eyes snapped open. A man stood 5 feet away. He wasn't dressed like a tourist. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it had been molded to his frame by a sculptor. His face was a map of sharp angles and absolute stillness. He didn't look at her with lust. He looked at her with a terrifying, ancient recognition. "I can handle myself," Zara said, her American accent sharp against the quiet. "I know you can," the man said. He stepped forward. The movement was predatory, fluid. "But the world is a violent place, Zara Williams." Her blood turned to ice. "How do you know my name?" "I've known your name since I was 12 years old. I've known the sound of your breath. I've known the way you tilt your head when you're lying to yourself." Zara stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who are you?" "My name is Kang Tae-jun, and you are lost." "I'm not lost. My hotel is 3 blocks away." "You are lost in a life that doesn't deserve you," Tae-jun said. He was closer now. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical weight, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. "You stay with a man who looks at his phone more than your face. You work for people who see your brilliance as a threat. You are starving, Zara, and I have spent 20 years preparing the feast." "You're insane!" Zara turned to run, but the path was blocked. 2 men in black suits appeared from the shadows. One was older, with a face like etched granite. Min Seok. He didn't look at her with malice, only a quiet, professional pity. "Don't touch me!" Zara screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the city. Tae-jun didn't move. He watched her. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to give you what you've been screaming for in your sleep. I'm going to give you a reason to feel alive." A cloth, heavy with the scent of something sweet and chemical, pressed against her face. Zara fought. She scratched at the arms holding her, her vision blurring as the neon lights of Seoul began to spin into long, jagged streaks of white. The last thing she felt was a hand, large, warm, and steady, cupping the back of her head, guiding her down as the world went black. When Zara woke, she wasn't in a basement. She wasn't in a cage. She was lying on a bed of silk so deep it felt like water. The room was vast, circular, and walled in glass. Outside, the sun was rising over the Han River, turning the water into a sheet of hammered silver. She sat up, her head throbbing. She was still in her clothes, but her shoes had been removed. "Drink this." Tae-jun was sitting in a leather armchair across the room. He held a glass of water. He looked exactly the same as he had the night before, perfectly pressed, perfectly calm. "Where is Ethan?" Zara's voice was a croak. "Calling the police, then calling his office. By noon, he will be told that you left of your own accord. By tomorrow, he will believe it. He is a man of low conviction, Zara. He will take the payout I offered and disappear." "You bought him?" Zara felt a surge of nausea. "I offered him an exit from a relationship he was too cowardly to end. He took it." Tae-jun stood and walked toward her. He set the water on the nightstand. "I didn't bring you here to be a slave. I didn't bring you here for a ransom. Then why? Taejun leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could see a faint, jagged scar running into his hairline. His eyes were dark, bottomless wells. 20 years ago, I watched my father die. I was shot in the chest. As the light was leaving my eyes, I saw a face, not an angel, not a dream. You. I saw you as you are now. I spent my life building an empire so I would have the resources to find that face. I found it. That's impossible. I was in Detroit 20 years ago. I've never been to Korea. Logic is for men like Ethan, Taejun whispered. Fate is for men like me. He straightened up, his hands clasping behind his back. Here is the arrangement. You will stay here, in my home, for 2 months. You will have everything you desire: clothes, food, books, music. You will go nowhere without my permission. I will not force you into my bed. I will not touch you unless you ask me to. Zara stared at him, her fear beginning to calcify into a cold, hard rage. And after 2 months? If you do not love me by the end of 60 days, I will let you go. I will give you a new identity, enough money to never work again, and you can disappear. I will never love you. I hate you. I loathe the very air you're breathing. Taejun's lips quirked into the ghost of a smile. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. I've waited 20 years, Zara. I can wait 60 days for you to realize that your hate is just the only way you know how to protect yourself from the truth. What truth? That you've been waiting for me too. He turned and walked toward the door. Wait! She shouted. What if I try to kill you? Taejun stopped, his hand on the handle. He didn't look back. Then at least I'll die being noticed by you. That's more than Ethan ever gave you. The door clicked shut. Zara was alone in a palace of glass, and the countdown had begun. The high-altitude silence of the mountain villa didn't break Zara. It hollowed her out. Every meal was a curated masterpiece she refused to taste, and every silk robe felt like a bribe against her skin. She spent the first 72 hours staring at the Bukhansan peaks through reinforced glass, waiting for the ransom demand that never came. She stood on the balcony, watching a hawk circle the gray, jagged granite. The drop is 400 feet, a voice said. Zara didn't jump. She was becoming accustomed to the way Taejun moved, like a shadow returning to its owner. He stood at the railing, 6 feet of calm, lethal composure. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the bird. The guards at the base are instructed to catch you, not kill you. You'd just end up back in that bed with shattered legs. I prefer you mobile. Zara turned, her eyes snapping with a fire that had been smoldering for days. Is this the part where I'm supposed to be grateful for the luxury of my kidnapping? Taejun finally looked at her. The wind caught his dark hair, pulling it away from the jagged scar on his temple. He looks like a man made of marble and old blood, she thought, then immediately hated the observation. I don't want your gratitude, Zara. I want your presence. You have my presence. You've locked me in a cage. Your body is here, he said, stepping closer. The air between them instantly tightened. But your mind is still trying to negotiate with a life that's already over. You're still mourning a man who didn't even wait for the wire transfer to clear before he changed his phone number. The reminder of Ethan was a physical blow. It was the one bruise Taejun knew exactly how to press. Stop talking about him. Why? Does it remind you that you were settling? That you spent 5 years shrinking yourself so he could feel tall? Taejun reached out. This time he didn't hesitate. His fingers brushed the hair away from her neck. His skin was cool, but the contact felt like a live wire. You are a queen who forgot she had a throne. I am simply reminding you of the weight of the crown. Zara slapped his hand away. The sound cracked in the mountain air. Taejun didn't flinch. He didn't grow angry. He simply tilted his head, his dark eyes tracking the movement of her chest as she breathed. That, he whispered. That is what I saw 20 years ago. The fire. Most women in my world are porcelain. They break if you look at them too hard. But you bite. I'll do more than bite if you don't let me out of here. Then do it, he challenged. He stepped into her personal space, his chest inches from hers. He smelled of sandalwood and something metallic. Kill me, Zara. My guards won't stop you if I order them not to. There's a letter opener in the study, sharp enough to find the carotid if you're fast. Do it, and you're free. Zara stared at him. Her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs. She could see the pulse in his jaw. He was dead serious. He was handing her his life as if it were a cheap coin. You're a psychopath, she breathed. I'm a man who knows exactly what he's willing to pay for what he wants. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over the shell of her ear. The question is, Zara, what are you willing to pay to feel this alive again? He left her then, trembling in the wind. That night, dinner was served in the courtyard. The floor was black glass suspended over a lighted koi pond. Taejun sat at the head, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with tension and old scars. He didn't speak. He watched her eat. It wasn't the gaze of a lover. It was the gaze of an architect studying a blueprint. What happened to your father? Zara asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the clink of silverware. Taejun paused, a piece of sashimi halfway to his mouth. He set it down. He was the chairman of the Lotus Syndicate. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. His best friend put a bullet in his throat while I watched from under a desk. And you? I took the second bullet. It missed my heart by 3 centimeters. The doctors said it was a miracle. I knew it was just because the universe wasn't finished with me yet. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. While the blood was filling my lungs, I saw you. You were standing in a field of tall grass. You looked at me and said, "Not yet." Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I've never been in a field of grass. I grew up in a concrete apartment in Detroit. The soul doesn't care about geography, Taejun said. He stood up and walked around the table. He stopped behind her chair. He didn't touch her, but he leaned over, his hands gripping the back of her seat. Zara was pinned between his arms. I have spent every day since then making sure that when I finally found you, I would be a man worth looking at. Not a dying boy. A king. He reached forward, his fingers trailing slowly down her arm from the shoulder to the wrist. It was a slow, agonizingly deliberate movement. Zara's skin erupted in goosebumps. She should have pulled away, she should have screamed. But the sheer gravity of his focus was a drug. No one had ever looked at her like this, as if she were the only fixed point in a spinning world. "You have 48 days left, Zara," he murmured, his breath hot against her neck. "The clock is ticking. Are you going to spend them fighting me? Or are you going to start being honest about why you're still here?" "I'm here because I have no choice," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "You have 1,000 choices," Taejun replied, his hand finally closing around her wrist, his thumb tracing the rapid beat of her pulse. "You could have jumped off that balcony. You could have starved, but you're eating. You're breathing. And your heart is racing because I'm touching you." He let go abruptly. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we leave the house." Zara stayed in the chair long after he left, watching the koi swim in circles under the glass. For the first time, the cage didn't feel like it was made of stone. It felt like it was made of her own pulse. The next morning, a black SUV sat idling in the driveway. Min-seok stood by the door, his face a mask of professional boredom. "Where are we going?" Zara asked as she was ushered into the back. Taejun was already there, reading a newspaper. "You're a branding expert. You find Seoul's luxury market derivative. I'm going to show you the parts of the city that aren't for tourists." They drove into the heart of the city, but they didn't stop at the malls or the palaces. They wound through the back streets of Gangnam, eventually stopping at a nondescript steel door guarded by 2 men with visible holsters. Inside was a private auction house. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and desperation. Men in tailored suits sat in silence as artifacts worth millions were traded like candy. Taejun didn't bid on anything. He sat in the back row, his hand resting casually on the armrest between them. His pinky finger was just barely touching Zara's. A tiny point of contact that felt like a bolt of lightning. "Why are we here?" she whispered. "To show you the price of things," he said. A jade statue was brought out. The bidding started at 5 million. "That statue was stolen from a tomb in Gyeongju," Taejun said, his voice a low hum. "The man who stole it lost 3 fingers. The man who bought it lost his life. People kill for things they think will make them whole. They never realize that the object is just a mirror." He turned to her, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second. "You think I bought you, Zara. You think you're an object on this stage. But you're the only thing in this room that isn't for sale." "Everything is for sale, Taejun. You told me you bought Ethan." "I bought his absence. There is a difference." Suddenly, the doors at the front of the room burst open. 3 men in leather jackets charged in, suppressed handguns raised. The room erupted in a silent, muffled chaos. Before Zara could even gasp, Taejun's arm was around her waist, yanking her out of her seat and onto the floor. He shielded her body with his own, his weight heavy and solid. "Stay down," he commanded. She could hear the thwip-thwip of suppressed fire. Glass shattered somewhere above them. Taejun didn't move. He didn't shake. He stayed draped over her, his hand cradling the back of her head, pressing her face into his chest. She could hear his heart. It wasn't racing. It was slow, steady, rhythmic. He's not afraid, she realized with a jolt of terror. He's bored. Min-seok and the other guards returned fire. Within 30 seconds, the room was silent again, save for the sound of heavy breathing and the smell of ozone. Taejun stood up, smoothing his suit as if nothing had happened. He reached down and offered Zara a hand. She took it, her fingers trembling. He pulled her up, but he didn't let go. He drew her close, checking her face for scratches. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered. "Who were they?" "Business rivals," he said dismissively. "They think they can disrupt my peace. They are mistaken." He looked at her then, his eyes searching hers. For the first time, Zara didn't see the crime boss. She saw the boy who had been shot. The vulnerability was gone in a blink, replaced by that terrifying, ironclad control. As they walked back to the car, Zara realized she was still holding his hand. And for the first time, she didn't want to let go. The adrenaline from the auction house shooting didn't fade. It curdled into a restless, jagged energy that vibrated between them in the back of the sedan. Taejun sat perfectly still, his profile a silhouette of cold indifference as the neon blur of Seoul streaked across the window. Zara watched his hands. They were steady. He hadn't reached for a weapon. He had reached for her. "You knew they were coming," she said, her voice sounding thin in the plush interior. "I knew they were thinking about it," Taejun replied. He didn't turn his head. To anticipate a blow is to take away its power. They wanted a spectacle. I gave them a funeral. "You used me as bait." "I used myself as a shield. There is a distinction, Zara. If a single hair on your head had been harmed, that room would have been painted in their lineage." He turned then, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The intensity was suffocating. "Do not mistake my restraint for a lack of ruthlessness. I am only patient with you." The car pulled into the underground garage of his private estate. The heavy steel gates groaned shut behind them, a sound that usually felt like a prison sentence. Tonight it felt like a sanctuary. Zara stepped out, her legs still humming from the shock. She started toward the elevator, but Taejun's hand caught her elbow. It wasn't a grip, it was a suggestion of power. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm angry." "You're lying." He guided her not toward her room, but toward the floor that housed the indoor pool, a massive subterranean grotto of black basalt and steaming water. The air was thick with the scent of minerals and cedar. "Swim," he commanded. "The water doesn't care about your fear." "I don't have a suit." "Then don't wear one. There are no cameras here, only me." He walked to the edge of the water and began to unbutton his shirt. Zara watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the fabric fell away. His body was a map of violence, long white scars across his ribs, a jagged entry wound near his collarbone, and the roped muscle of a man who lived in a state of constant readiness. He dove in, a silent, predatory arc that barely disturbed the surface. Zara stood on the edge. Her heart was a drum. She looked at the dark water, then at her own reflection in the basalt walls. She felt the weight of Ethan's neglect, the years of being a secondary character in her own life, the exhaustion of being strong. She kicked off her heels. She let the silk dress hit the floor. She entered the water at the opposite end. It was hot, borderline scalding, wrapping around her like a heavy velvet shroud. She swam toward the center, her strokes long and desperate. Taejun appeared from the depths, treading water just inches away. His hair was slicked back, exposing the raw, unblinking focus of his gaze. 22 days, he said, his voice echoing off the stone. You're starting to look at me without wishing I were dead. Maybe I'm just getting tired of the view, Zara countered, though her breath was shallow. Taejun moved closer. In the water, their bodies were blurred shadows, drifting toward one another. He reached out, his hand submerged, and found her waist. He pulled her flush against him. The contact was electric. The heat of the water vanished compared to the heat of his skin. Zara's hands instinctively went to his shoulders, her fingers digging into the wet muscle. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. His face was so close she could feel the humidity of his breath. "Tell me you want to go back to the hotel. Tell me you want the man who didn't fight for you." Zara opened her mouth to speak, but the lie died in her throat. She looked at the scar on his chest, the place where the bullet had almost taken him. She traced it with her thumb. "Why did you wait?" she asked. "Because a vision isn't a conquest. It's a haunting. I didn't want a woman. I wanted the woman. And I knew that once you saw what I could give you, not just the money, but the weight of being seen, you wouldn't be able to breathe without it." He leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead, then her temple. He didn't kiss her mouth. He was starving her, maintaining a psychological distance that was more intimate than any touch. "You're a predator," she breathed, her head falling back as his mouth found the sensitive cord of her neck. "I'm a mirror, Zara. I'm showing you the hunger you've been suppressing for a decade." His hand moved up her spine, his touch light as a feather but leaving a trail of fire. He pressed her closer, the power dynamic shifting in the dark water. For the first time, she wasn't fighting him. She was holding on. Suddenly, he pulled away. He climbed out of the pool in one fluid motion, standing tall and dripping on the black stone. "The 2 months aren't over," he said, his voice returning to that terrifying, controlled rasp. "And I don't take what isn't freely given. Go to bed, Zara." He left her shivering in the warm water, more alone than she had ever been in her life. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Min-seok was gone, and there were more men in the foyer than usual. Taejun was in his study, the doors closed. Zara found Tasha, or rather, Tasha found her. A laptop had been left on her bed with a secure video link. "Zara? Oh my God, Zara!" Tasha's face filled the screen. She looked frantic, her braids disheveled. "Where are you? Ethan came back to LA and said you had a mental breakdown and decided to stay in Seoul. He's already seeing that girl from the marketing firm." Zara sat on the edge of the bed, a cold stone settling in her stomach. "He's seeing someone else?" "He didn't even wait for the jet lag to wear off, Z. But listen, something is wrong. He's got all this new money. He bought a Porsche. He's telling everyone you're finding yourself. Zara, are you okay? Are you being held?" Zara looked at the door. She looked at the luxury that surrounded her. She could tell Tasha the truth. She could tell Tasha the truth. She could scream for help. "I'm okay, Tosh," Zara said, her voice steady. I needed a break. Ethan and I are over. I'm just taking some time." "In Seoul? Since when do you like Korea?" "Since I realized I was invisible in America." Zara closed the laptop before Tasha could ask more. She stood up and walked to the study. She didn't knock, she pushed the doors open. Taejun was standing behind his desk, flanked by 3 men Zara didn't recognize. They looked like soldiers, their faces etched with the kind of violence that Taejun usually kept hidden. "Get out," Taejun said to the men. They vanished instantly. "You gave me that laptop so I could see he moved on," Zara said, her voice trembling with rage. "You wanted me to see him with another woman." Taejun didn't deny it. He sat down, leaning back in his chair. "I wanted you to see the reality of your commitment. He replaced you in 72 hours. I waited 20 years. You tell me who the monster is." "You manipulated me." "I provided information. What you do with it is your choice." He stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her, his presence looming. "The world is moving against me, Zara. My enemies saw what happened at the auction. They know you are my weakness." "I'm not your weakness, I'm your prisoner." "You're both," he said, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. He forced her to look at him. "And because you are my weakness, I have to be more calculated. There is a gala tonight. The chairman of the Row Syndicate will be there. He is the man who ordered the hit at the auction." "And you want me to go?" "I want you to be the most beautiful thing in the room. I want them to see that I have found what I was looking for. I want them to know that if they touch you, I will erase their names from history." "You're using me as a declaration of war." "I'm using you as my queen," he corrected. "Choose a dress. Make it red. I want them to see the blood before I even draw it." He let go of her jaw, his eyes lingering on her lips with a hunger that was no longer controlled. "Be ready by 8. And Zara, don't try to run tonight. The wolves are out, and I'm the only one who doesn't want to eat you." Zara turned to leave but stopped at the door. "What if I don't want to be a queen?" Taejun didn't look up from his desk. "Then you'll just be another body in the tall grass. And I've seen enough of those." Zara walked back to her room, her mind a whirlwind. She looked at the closet, filled with gowns that cost more than her college tuition. She reached for the red silk. She wasn't running anymore. She was stepping into the fire. The red silk didn't just fit. It claimed her. It was a heavy, cold weight that draped low enough to be a provocation and slit high enough to be a threat. Zara stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her dark skin glowing against the crimson fabric. She looked like a warning. The door opened without a knock. Taejun stood there in a tuxedo that made him look like a weapon wrapped in velvet. He didn't speak. He walked across the room, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a necklace, a teardrop of black diamond suspended on a platinum chain. He stepped behind her, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The contact sent a jolt through her spine, a familiar, treacherous heat. "The Row Syndicate expects a victim," he whispered, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "Show them a predator." "I'm a strategist, Taejun. I don't know how to play these games." "You've been playing them your whole life, Zara. You just didn't have the right stakes." He turned her around, his hands resting on her waist. "Tonight, the stake is survival. Stay close. Speak only when I do. And do not look away from me." The gala was held in a private estate in Songbuk-dong, a fortress of traditional architecture and modern security. As they stepped out of the car, the air was thick with the scent of pine and expensive cologne. Men in sharp suits bowed as Taejun passed, their eyes darting to Zara with a mixture of curiosity and fear. They entered the main hall. It was a sea of black and white, punctuated by the glint of champagne flutes and the low hum of dangerous conversations. At the far end of the room sat Chairman Rowe. He was an old man, his skin like yellowed parchment, his eyes buried in folds of ancient malice. He didn't stand when they approached. "Tae-jun," Rowe rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "I heard you had a busy afternoon at the auction." "A minor inconvenience, Chairman," Tae-jun replied, his voice a smooth, lethal calm. He didn't let go of Zara's hand. "I believe you haven't met Zara Williams." Rowe leaned forward, his gaze raking over Zara with a clinical, disgusting slowness. "So this is the face from the vision. A lot of blood for one woman, don't you think?" "Not enough," Tae-jun said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "In fact, I find the current balance unsatisfactory." Zara felt the tension in Tae-jun's grip. It was a coiled spring. She looked at Rowe, seeing the arrogance in his withered face. She thought of Ethan, how he would have bowed, how he would have negotiated. "Is that why you sent 3 men to die today, Chairman?" Zara asked, her voice steady and clear. "To test the balance? Or because you were too old to do it yourself?" The room went silent. Even the clink of ice stopped. Rowe's eyes narrowed into slits. Tae-jun didn't look at her, but she felt his thumb trace a slow, approving circle on the back of her hand. "She has a tongue," Rowe whispered. "Careful, Tae-jun. Sharp things tend to cut their owners." "I'm not her owner," Tae-jun said, his gaze fixed on Rowe. "I'm her consequence. If you look at her again, I'll take your eyes. If you speak to her again, I'll take your tongue. Do we understand the parameters of our relationship tonight?" Rowe didn't answer. He waved a dismissive hand, and they walked away. They moved to a private balcony overlooking the city. The wind whipped Zara's hair, cooling the fire in her cheeks. "You shouldn't have spoken," Tae-jun said, though there was no anger in his voice. "He was insulting you, and me. He was baiting a reaction. You gave him one." Tae-jun stepped closer, boxing her in against the stone railing. "But I liked the sound of it, the way you stood your ground. You're beginning to understand." "Understand what? That I'm surrounded by killers?" "That you are the most dangerous person in this room, because you have nothing left to lose but me." He leaned down, his mouth inches from hers. The restraint that had defined their last few weeks was fraying. Zara could feel the hunger radiating off him, a dark, gravitational pull. 38 days, Zara, he murmured, and I'm losing my mind. Before she could respond, the balcony doors burst open. Min Seok appeared, his face tight. "Sir, the perimeter is breached. They didn't wait for the end of the night." Tae-jun didn't panic. He reached into the small of his back and pulled out a suppressed handgun, checking the chamber with a practiced, mechanical flick. "Take her to the secondary exit," Tae-jun commanded. "No," Zara said, grabbing his arm. "I'm not leaving you here." Tae-jun looked at her. For a split second, the mask of the cold boss slipped, and she saw the boy from the vision, terrified of losing the only light he'd ever known. "Go with Min Seok," he ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. "If I don't find you in an hour, the driver has instructions to take you to the airport. You'll be free." "I don't want to be free like that." He didn't listen. He shoved her toward Min Seok and turned back toward the hall as the first sounds of gunfire erupted inside. The flight through the estate was a blur of shadows and screams. Min Seok moved with brutal efficiency, clearing hallways before Zara could even see the thread. They reached the service tunnel, the air damp and smelling of old stone. "Get in the car," Min Seok said, gesturing to a nondescript SUV waiting at the end of the tunnel. "We have to go back for him," Zara pleaded. "He is the chairman. He is the storm. My job is to keep the treasure dry." They sped away into the night, the lights of the estate fading behind them. Zara stared out the back window, her heart a jagged stone in her chest. She realized with a sickening jolt that she wasn't praying for her own safety. She was praying for his. An hour passed, then 2. The car pulled into a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a minimalist concrete structure hidden in a pine forest. Min Seok checked his phone every 5 minutes. The silence was agonizing. Then, the sound of a heavy engine. A black sedan, riddled with bullet holes and missing a headlight, limped into the driveway. Zara didn't wait for Min Seok. She ran out into the cold night air. The door opened. Taejun stepped out. His tuxedo was torn, and blood was smeared across his cheek. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped for the first time since she'd met him. He saw her and stopped. Zara didn't think. She threw herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face buried in the crook of his shoulder. He smelled of cordite and copper. His arms came around her, crushing her against him. He buried his face in her hair, a ragged breath escaping him. "You didn't go to the airport," he rasped. "I'm not a coward, Taejun." He pulled back, his hands framing her face. His eyes were wild, searching hers for something he hadn't dared to hope for. "Why stay?" "Because," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I realized I don't want a life where no one fights for me." Taejun didn't wait. He crashed his mouth against hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, starving claim. It tasted of blood and salt and 20 years of waiting. Zara kissed him back with a ferocity that shocked her. She grabbed his hair, pulling him closer, needing the friction, the heat, the absolute certainty of him. He lifted her off her feet, his hands under her thighs, and carried her into the house. He didn't stop until they reached the bedroom. He set her down, but he didn't let go. He stared at her, his chest heaving. "I told you I wouldn't touch you unless you asked," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Zara reached out, her fingers trembling as she undid the silk tie of her dress. The red fabric fell to the floor, leaving her in nothing but the black diamonds. "Ask me," he whispered. "Take me," she said, her eyes locked on his. "Don't give me a choice. Just take me." Taejun didn't hesitate. He closed the distance, and for the first time in her life, Zara felt like she wasn't just being seen. She was being worshipped. The weeks following the gala were a blur of heavy silences and a new, grounding gravity. The house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the only place in the world where the air was thick enough to breathe. Zara spent her mornings in the library, not because she was hiding, but because she was learning the architecture of Taejun's empire. She saw the ledgers, the shipping manifests, and the maps of a city that bowed to a man who only bowed to her. Taejun was different. The coldness hadn't thawed, that was his nature, but it had redirected. He was no longer observing her, he was protecting her. He worked from the desk in her room, the rhythmic tapping of his keyboard a heartbeat that kept her anchored. One afternoon, Zara stood by the window, watching a fleet of black sedans pull into the courtyard. "The Row Syndicate is gone," Taejun said, not looking up from his files. Zara turned. "Gone?" "The chairman died in his sleep. His sons are currently negotiating their retirement." Taejun stood and walked toward her. He looked rested, his suit impeccable, the violence of the gala a fading shadow. "The board is clear, Zara. There are no more wolves at the door." He stopped in front of her, his hand reaching out to trace the line of her jaw. His touch was no longer a provocation. It was a promise. "The 60 days are up tomorrow," he murmured. Zara felt a sharp, cold pang in her chest. She had forgotten the deadline. The arbitrary number they had started with felt like a relic from another life. "I know," she whispered. "The jet is fueled. Your old life is waiting. Tasha has been calling the embassy daily. I've prepared a settlement that will make you one of the wealthiest women in America. You can go back, Zara. You can walk into a boardroom and never have to look over your shoulder again." He let go of her. He didn't plead. He didn't even look sad. He stood there with the same terrifying composure he had the night he took her. He was giving her the one thing he had spent 20 years trying to avoid. A choice. "Is that what you want?" Zara asked. "What I want is irrelevant. I told you I wouldn't force you. If you stay because you cannot imagine a world where I am not your center. If you leave, I will go back to being a vision." Zara looked at him. She thought about the sterile luxury of her life with Ethan. She thought about the invisible walls of her career, the polite dismissals, the way she had been a striking accessory. Then she looked at the man before her, a monster, a king, a ghost who had bled for her before he even knew her name. "I can't go back," she said. Taejun's eyes darkened, a flash of something raw breaking through the ice. "Why?" "Because you ruined me for anyone else," she whispered, stepping into his space. She grabbed his tie, pulling him down until their foreheads touched. "You gave me the weight of being seen. I can't go back to being a ghost." Taejun's arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in her neck, a ragged, relieved sound escaping him. "Then the vision is finished," he rasped. "Now, we begin the reality." The reality was a whirlwind. Within a month, Zara was no longer a guest. She was the silent architect of the Lotus Syndicate's public image. She moved money through shells that didn't look like blood money. She rebranded the violence into security. She was brilliant, cold, and entirely devoted. But the shift wasn't just professional. It happened on a rainy Tuesday in April. Zara was in the kitchen, the scent of morning tea making her stomach turn in a way she couldn't ignore. She leaned against the marble counter, her hand flying to her mouth. Taejun was there in an instant, his hand on her lower back. "You're pale." "I'm fine. Just the tea." "You don't drink tea," he noted, his eyes narrowing. He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her stomach, then back to her eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He didn't speak. He picked her up, carrying her to the sofa as if she were made of glass. He knelt between her knees, his hands trembling, actually trembling, as he pressed his palms against her abdomen. "Zara," he breathed. "I haven't taken the test yet," she said, her voice shaking. But I know. I can feel it. Taejun closed his eyes. For a long minute, he just leaned his forehead against her stomach. The hyper-controlled crime boss was gone. In his place was the boy who had survived a bullet, now realizing he was finally, truly, going to live. I will build a world for them, he whispered into her skin. I will burn everything down to make sure they never see the things I saw. We'll build it together, Zara said, her fingers tangling in his hair. For a moment, the world was perfect. The sun broke through the Seoul clouds, hitting the glass walls of their fortress. They were young, powerful, and expectant. But in Taejun's world, perfection is a target. Min Seok entered the room, his face paler than usual. He didn't look at Zara. He looked only at Taejun. Sir, we have a problem. Not today, Min Seok, Taejun said, not moving. It's the Blue House and the Americans. They've linked the auction shooting to the LVMH merger. They're calling it international terrorism. The warrants are being signed now. Taejun stiffened. He stood up, the ice slamming back into place. He looked at Zara, his expression a mask of calculation. We have to move, he said. Move where? Zara asked, her heart beginning to hammer. To the island. We have a compound in Jeju. It's off-grid. They can't touch us there while I negotiate with the ministry. He didn't wait for her to agree. He barked orders at Min Seok, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. The house, which had been a sanctuary, instantly turned back into a command center. Pack nothing, Taejun told her, grabbing her shoulders. We leave in 10 minutes. The car is armored. We'll take the mountain pass to the private airfield. Taejun, what's happening? The world is trying to take what's mine, he said, his eyes burning with a terrifying, ancient fire. They're too late. He kissed her, a hard, desperate brand on her lips, and ushered her toward the garage. As they descended into the darkened belly of the estate, Zara felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. She looked at Taejun's profile, silhouetted against the dim garage lights. He looked like a god of war. She put her hand on her stomach. One way or another, she thought. This life ends today. The transition to Jeju was not a retreat. It was an extraction. The armored sedan tore through the serpentine mountain passes of Seoul, the engine a low, predatory growl against the silence of the dawn. Taejun sat beside Zara, his laptop balanced on his knees, his fingers flying across the keys with a clinical, detached aggression. He wasn't looking at the road. He was moving assets, cutting ties, and cauterizing the wounds of his empire before the authorities could bleed him dry. Min Seok, Taejun said, his voice a flat line. The Maritime Police? Bribed or blinded, sir. The radar at the private docks will stay dark for exactly 20 minutes. Taejun nodded. He reached over and took Zara's hand. His palm was dry, his grip like iron. He didn't look at her, but the pressure of his thumb against her knuckles was a silent conversation. I am here. You are safe. The world is burning, but we are the fire. They reached the coast as the sun began to bleed over the East Sea. A matte black interceptor boat bobbed in the choppy gray water, its engines idling with a deep, bone-shaking hum. Zara stepped onto the deck, the salt spray stinging her cheeks. She looked back at the mainland. The Seoul skyline was a jagged tooth on the horizon, a world she had entered as a disillusioned strategist and was leaving as the silent partner to a king. Don't look back, Taejun whispered, appearing behind her. He wrapped a heavy wool coat around her shoulders, his arms lingering. There is nothing left for us there but ghosts. The crossing to Jeju was fast and violent. The boat slammed against the waves, a mechanical beast fighting the ocean. Taejun spent the entire trip on a satellite phone, his voice a series of sharp, monosyllabic commands. He was negotiating with the Blue House, offering names of his rivals in exchange for a quiet investigation. He was trading pieces of his soul to keep her world intact. They arrived at the Jeju compound, a brutalist fortress of volcanic stone and glass perched on the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking the Black Sea. It was a place of isolation and absolute power. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and expensive cedar. "You'll stay here," Taejun told her, guiding her to a room that overlooked the crashing surf. "The walls are reinforced. The guards are my personal kin. Even the Americans wouldn't dare a drone strike on this soil." "And you?" Zara asked, her hand instinctively finding her stomach. "I have to go to the capital. I have to sign the papers in person. If I don't, the warrants become international. They'll hunt us to the ends of the earth." "No," Zara said, grabbing his lapels. "It's a trap, Taejun." "You know it is." Taejun looked at her. For a moment, the mask of the chairman fractured. He looked tired. The 20 years of waiting, the 2 months of pursuing, and the weeks of protecting had carved deep lines into his face. "I have spent my life making sure no one can touch what I love," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. "If I stay here, I'm a coward. If I go, I'm a target. I'd rather be a target than let you live in a cage for the rest of your life." He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. 2 days, Zara. I'll be back in 48 hours with a clean slate. We'll go to Switzerland. We'll go to the Maldives. We'll go wherever the vision takes us. He kissed her, a long, desperate tasting of her lips that felt like a goodbye disguised as a promise. He left at dusk. The next 48 hours were a psychological war. Zara paced the halls of the stone fortress, the sound of the waves below sounding like a countdown. Min Seok remained at her side, a silent, watchful gargoyle. "Has he called?" she asked for the 100th time. "The signal is jammed for security, ma'am. We wait for the courier." On the second night, a courier arrived, not with a message, but with a package. Zara opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a small, velvet box and a handwritten note in elegant, sharp calligraphy. "The debt is paid. The vision is real. Wait for me at the tunnel entrance to the airfield at midnight. We leave for good." Inside the box was a ring. Not a diamond, but a raw, uncut piece of black volcanic glass from the island. It was heavy, dark, and permanent. Zara put it on. "Min Seok, get the car." "The chairman said to wait for his signal." "This is the signal," she snapped, her eyes flashing with a cold authority she had learned from the man himself. "We're going. Now." They drove toward the private airfield, a hidden strip of tarmac carved into the side of a mountain. The only way in or out was through a long, narrow tunnel, a 3-mile stretch of reinforced concrete that acted as a final bottleneck for security. The SUV entered the tunnel. The orange sodium lights flickered overhead, creating a rhythmic, hypnotic strobe effect against the black leather interior. Zara looked at her reflection in the window. She looked older, harder. She looked like a woman who had survived a war. We're halfway through, Min-seok said, his hand moving to his sidearm. Something's wrong. The escort vehicles aren't at the exit. Zara sat up, her heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm. Suddenly the car slowed. At the end of the tunnel, a wall of blinding white light appeared. Not the sun. Searchlights. A fleet of black SUVs, not Taejun's, blocked the exit. Men in tactical gear stepped out, their rifles raised. "Reverse!" Zara screamed. Min-seok slammed the car into gear, the tires shrieking against the concrete. But behind them, a heavy steel gate began to grind shut, sealing the entrance. They were trapped. A single figure stepped into the light at the exit. He wasn't in tactical gear. He was in a suit. It wasn't Taejun. It was Ethan. He looked different, polished, arrogant, his face twisted into a smirk of triumph. He held a phone in one hand and a detonator in the other. "You thought you could just trade me in, Zara?" Ethan's voice echoed through the tunnel, amplified by a megaphone. "You thought his money was better than mine. The Americans wanted a back door into the syndicate. I gave them the key. And they gave me everything he took." "Ethan, stop!" Zara shouted, leaning out the window. "I'm pregnant!" Ethan paused. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a cold, vacuous hate. "Then you can both die together," he whispered. He pressed the button. The roof of the tunnel erupted in a roar of fire and falling stone. Dust choked the air, turning the world gray. Zara's car was thrown forward by the force of the blast. Then, the engine died. The lights went out. The only sound was the settling of rubble and the distant rhythmic drip of water. Zara closed her eyes, her hand protecting her stomach as the darkness became absolute. The sterile white of the Zurich recovery suite was a far cry from the blood-stained silk of Seoul. Zara stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the evening snow settle on the Lamont River. It was 3 months since the extraction. 3 months since Taejun had placed her on a private medical jet and stayed behind to finish the negotiation. He had kept his word. The money had arrived in a series of untraceable accounts. A new identity, Sarah Miller, waited in a safe deposit box. Tasha had been flown out, her frantic energy finally settling into a quiet, suspicious protective shell. "You're staring again," Tasha said, leaning against the doorframe with 2 mugs of tea. "The doctor said you need to stop pacing. Stress isn't good for the vacation you're on." Zara didn't turn. "It's too quiet here, Tosh." "Quiet is good. Quiet means no one is shooting at us. Quiet means you can go back to New York, take that SVP job at the firm, and pretend the last 6 months were a fever dream." Zara touched the glass. A fever dream. She tried to summon the face of Ethan, but it was a blurred gray smudge in her memory. When she closed her eyes, she didn't see the Manhattan skyline. She saw the way Taejun looked at her in the pool, the raw, ancient recognition of a man who had built an empire just to find the girl from a dying vision. She looked at her hand. The black diamond was gone, locked in the safe. Her finger felt unnervingly light. "I can't go back to New York," Zara whispered. "Why not? The warrants are cleared. Your name is clean. Taejun made sure of it." "Because I'm already gone," Zara said, turning to face her friend. "I left the woman who worked for Ethan in that tunnel. If I go back now, I'm just a ghost haunting my own life." Tasha sighed, a long, weary sound. "He ruined you, didn't he? He took you, locked you up, and made you think you can't breathe without his permission." "No," Zara said, her voice gaining a sharp, cold edge. "He's the only one who ever saw me without asking for permission first. Everyone else wanted a version of me. He wanted the fire." She left the next morning. No note for Tasha, just a simple wire transfer to cover her friend's flight home. Zara didn't head for the airport. She headed for the train station. She spent 2 weeks moving through Europe, testing the air in Paris, London, and Rome. Each city felt like a stage set. The food was tasteless. The people were translucent. She was at a small cafe in Milan when the nausea hit. Not a wave, but a sledgehammer. She sat in the cramped bathroom, staring at the plastic stick. 2 blue lines. A new life, conceived in the adrenaline and copper scent of a safe house in the hills of Seoul. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She felt a sudden, terrifyingly clear sense of gravity. She didn't call him. She didn't want to be found again. She wanted to choose. The return to Seoul was a study in shadows. Zara avoided the luxury hotels and the branding districts. She took a small, damp apartment in an older part of the city, where the laundry hung between buildings and the scent of grilled meat and exhaust was thick. She spent a week watching the mechanic shop from a distance. Taejun was there every day. He wasn't the chairman anymore. The suits were gone. He wore grease-stained work pants and a black t-shirt that showed the roped muscle and scars of his arms. He worked with a silent, mechanical fury, rarely speaking to the men around him. He looked like a man who had accepted a life sentence and was determined to serve it in silence. On the 8th day, she walked into the shop. The bell above the door chimed, a cheap, tinny sound. The air was heavy with the smell of gasoline and old iron. Taejun was under the chassis of a black sedan, his boot sticking out from the side. "We're closed," he rasped. The voice was the same, a low, resonant vibration that made the hair on Zara's neck stand up. "I'm not looking for a repair," Zara said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the lungs. The sound of the creeper sliding out from under the car was slow, deliberate. Taejun stood up, wiping his hands on a rag that was already black with oil. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He stood there, silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights of the garage, looking at her as if she were a ghost he had finally summoned. "You're supposed to be in Zurich," he said. His voice was steady, but she saw the way his fingers tightened around the rag until his knuckles turned white. "I didn't like the weather," Zara replied. She stepped into the light, letting him see the change in her face, the hardness in her eyes, the way she didn't flinch. "And I didn't like the silence." Taejun walked toward her, his movements predatory and fluid, even in the grime of the shop. He stopped 3 feet away. The pressure of his presence was an immediate physical weight. "I gave you the world, Zara. I gave you your freedom. Why come back to a man with blood on his hands?" "Because your blood matches mine," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She took his hand, the hand covered in grease and grit, and pressed it firmly against her stomach. "And because I'm not the only one who came back." Taejun froze. His eyes dropped to her waist, then back to her face. For the first time since she had met him, the hyper-controlled mask shattered. A raw, jagged vulnerability broke through the ice of his gaze. He didn't pull away. His fingers spread across her abdomen, his touch trembling with a terrifying, silent intensity. "How long?" he breathed. 3 months. It started in the safe house. Taejun closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. He smelled of rain and metal. "I thought I had saved you from this life." "You saved me for it," she corrected. "Now are you going to keep
Fixing cars? Or are you going to protect what's yours?"
Taejun pulled back, the coldness returning to his eyes, but this time it was focused outward. The king was back. He didn't need a suit, he just needed a reason.
"The Roe Syndicate didn't die with the chairman,"
he said, his voice a low growl.
"They've been waiting for a weakness. They think you are it. Then let's show them they're wrong."
The next 4 months were a tactical ballet. They lived in a series of moving safe houses, never staying in one place for more than 48 hours. Taejun didn't force intimacy, but he was always there, a shadow at the edge of her vision, a hand on the small of her back as they moved through the darkness. He studied her reactions, anticipated her fatigue, and curated her world with a silent, obsessive devotion. The tension wasn't soft, it was a wire pulled until it hummed. Every meal was checked, every car was swept. The attraction between them manifested as a cynical, shared irritation at the world that wouldn't let them be. In the 8th month, the threat materialized. "The NAM exit," Min Seok said over the comms. He was in the lead car, his voice tight. "3 vehicles, blacked out. They aren't police." Taejun gripped the steering wheel of the armored SUV, his knuckles white. Zara sat in the passenger seat, her hand protecting the heavy swell of her stomach. They were heading for the Namhansan-sung Tunnel, the final stretch before the airfield. "Stay low," Taejun commanded. "I'm not hiding," Zara said, her hand moving to the suppressed weapon in the glove box. "You'll do as I say," he hissed. "I've waited 20 years for this child. I won't lose it in a concrete pipe." He accelerated. The engine roared, the sound echoing off the steep mountain walls as they approached the tunnel entrance. The black sedans behind them were closing the gap, their headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. They hit the mouth of the tunnel at 90 miles per hour. The orange sodium lights began their rhythmic, strobe-like flicker. 1, 2, 3. The world inside the tunnel was a blur of concrete ribs and shadow. Suddenly, the lead car, Min Seok's car, swerved. A heavy construction truck, parked sideways across both lanes at the exit, flared its high beams. "Trap!" Taejun shouted. He slammed on the brakes. The SUV skidded, the tires screaming against the pavement, the smell of burning rubber filling the cabin. They came to a halt 50 yards from the truck. Behind them, the 3 sedans screeched to a stop, boxing them in. The engine of the SUV died. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the hazards. Taejun looked at Zara. He didn't say he loved her. He didn't make a promise. He reached over and gripped the back of her neck, pulling her close for one final, bruising press of his lips against hers. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "do not look back." He reached for his door handle. On both ends of the tunnel, car doors began to open. The sound of heavy boots hitting the concrete echoed like a funeral drum. Tactical lights cut through the haze, blinding and white. Taejun stepped out into the strobe light, his silhouette sharp and lethal. Zara watched him through the reinforced glass. She put her hand on her stomach, feeling the life inside kick.
a small, defiant movement in the face of the end. The first shot rang out, a muffled thud against the concrete walls. Cut,